Hi, I'm Chris, your host here at Sci-Fi Eyes. If you enjoyed these, please remember to like and subscribe. So welcome to episode 4, Electronic Zoos. In this episode, I want to look at a piece of technology that's used in two different ways in two different stories, and used in a completely different way. The tech doesn't work in exactly the same way in the two stories. There's different operating principles. And I'll do my best to explain how it works using the terms used inside the story universe. So the two stories that these come from are both classic Doctor Who stories, one from the Jon Pertwee era and one from the Tom Baker era. So let's begin. First, what's an electronic zoo? So by this I'm referring to a piece of technology that can be used to contain live zoo specimens in a small amount of space. So it might look like a box the size of an arcade game, but as if you had miniaturized a bunch of zoo specimens and put them inside the box, okay, and could view them in there. All right, so that's the loose definition I'll use for an electronic zoo. All right, and this takes up less space than usual. It's not like a big full-size zoo, but it's miniaturized to fit inside the machine. So the first one we're going to talk about is the scope. All right, this is the scope, right? Sometimes called a miniscope, and it contains a set of self-contained miniaturized environments for different species. This particular one contains several enclosures, including ones for ogrons, cybermen, and some really nasty swamp creatures called the drashigs. The operator can select which enclosure is shown on the screen. Now, the scope maintains a compression field, and that's what keeps things small in the machine. And it turns out that things can be removed from the machine, and if they're kept out of the compression field for too long, then they return to their normal size. Now, the scope is the centerpiece of the classic Doctor Who story Carnival of Monsters. Vorg and Shurna, shown here, are two traveling carnival sideshow artists who eke out a living traveling between different planets and putting on a little sideshow with the scope. And so Vorg and Shurna arrive on the planet Eta Minor to do their show. And then three local bureaucrats, Kalik, Oram, and Pletrak, are assigned to decide on whether or not to grant Vorg and Shurna entry visas. It turns out this is an experiment on their part, as their planet is trying out having contact with other species after a long time of isolation. Of the three of them, Kalik is opposed to the visit. All right. Now, meanwhile, the Doctor and his companion Jo Grant seem to land on a cargo ship in the Indian Ocean in 1926. But they soon notice that the crew is behaving rather strangely, repeating their behaviors over and over. And the Doctor and Jo also notice an odd plate in the floor of the ship. Eventually, they manage to escape through the plate into the scope, and they climb around inside the machine, still miniaturized. At this point, the Doctor figures out that they must be in some kind of contraption like the scope. In their search for a way out of the machine, the Doctor and Jo break into another enclosure, this one containing the drashigs. Now, Shurna notices the Doctor and Jo in the drashigs enclosure. She's seen them on the screen while they're looking around. The drashigs are pretty nasty, and we see the Doctor and Jo only barely escape with Vorg's help. Shurna had asked him to do something, and we get to see his hand waving the drashigs away while the Doctor and Jo find the exit to that enclosure. Now, at this point, Kalik learns that the drashigs will hunt anything relentlessly, and that the Doctor and Jo have escaped from the drashig enclosure and are still crawling around in the machine. Kalik figures that if he can cause some kind of disaster around Vorg and Shurna's visit, he can nix this alien visa program. He's opposed to it. And so, knowing that the drashigs are crawling around inside the machine, he hopes that they will escape from the machine in order to cause the disaster that he needs. And in order to facilitate this, he even pries loose an external plate on the scope in the hopes of helping the drashigs escape. The Doctor manages to escape from the machine using Kalik's sabotaged plate, and then the Doctor returns to normal size once he's out of the machine. And at this point, he takes steps to try and help Jo get out of the machine. During that process, one of the drashigs does escape from the machine. And fortunately, Vorg's quick action eliminates it. He eradicates the Drashig, and the local dignitaries are really grateful to this. But Khalek got killed in the process. All right, so he got his just desserts. So all ends well, and Pletrac and Orm are very grateful that that Vorg had acted so quickly and saved the city from a rampage by the giant Drashig. So that's Carnival of Monsters. Now let's take a look at the second example of electronic zoo technology. This is the CET machine. CET stands for Continuous Event Transmuter. Now, the CET machine is used to convert patches of real estate into some kind of magnetic domains that are stored on these laser crystals. And this process leaves a bald patch on the planet where this snapshotting process takes place. That's why it's called the transmuter, continuous event transmuter. Now, the magnetic domains aren't a static picture of what was there, but rather a transmuted form of the captured life forms that continue to live and evolve on the crystals. That's why it's called the transmuter. Now, the CET machine has a projection system that can be used to view a selected recording, as they are called. And after a brief inspection, the doctor determines that it's a very early and crude version of this technology, and that it's missing some important components. One of these is described as a dimensional osmosis damper. And it turns out without this, it's possible to enter and to leave the projection. The transmutation effect is reversible and is reversed by the projection mechanism. Note that being possible, it's possible to enter and leave the zoo enclosures, just like the scope. Now, at the start, no one seems to know about this. It seems to be an accident of creation of this early version of this machine. Now, Professor Trist is a zoologist returning from an expedition to collect endangered species. He's the inventor of the machine, and he's using it for this project, and he's traveling with his assistant Della. They're on board the Starliner Empress. Now, when the Empress comes out of hyperspace, rematerializing in normal space, there's another vessel, the survey ship Hecate, that's located in the spot the Starliner is rematerializing. The two ships get stuck together, one passing through the other. At this point, the Doctor and his companion Romana arrive and see the virtual collision. The Doctor immediately sets off to help by trying to separate the ships. He figures they can reverse what happened in the accident, dematerialize one of the ships and pull them apart. In the process of trying to separate the ships, the Doctor discovers that some of the Starliner's crew are involved in drug trafficking. The drug is Vraxoin, and it's considered extremely dangerous, lethal. So there are some inept customs inspectors that come aboard, and they try and pin the drug smuggling on the Doctor. But he basically gets away from them. Now, it turns out that there was another member of Trist's expedition named Stott. And Stott was a narcotics agent, although no one knew this. And Stott's believed to be dead. He was attacked by a creature known as a mandrill on the planet Eden shortly before the capture of the Eden projection, right? Now, it turns out Stott wasn't killed in the attack, but was only injured. And this is unknown to Trist, and Stott ended up inside the Eden projection. Initially, Stott didn't know that he could get in and out of the projection. But once he figured it out, he began going in and out to continue his work as a narcotics agent. Now, out of the projection, Stott tells the Doctor that he was embedded in Trist's expedition because the expedition was already suspected of being involved in the Vraxoin trade. But there was no hard evidence. So Stott suspects that the Vraxoin is somehow linked to the Eden projection, but he doesn't know how. Now, in the process of trying to separate the ships, the Doctor makes a couple of discoveries. First, he discovers the source of the Vraxoin. It's the mandrills in the Eden projection. One of them has escaped and ends up getting electrocuted by some of the Doctor's jury-rigged works that he's using to separate the ships. And the result is the resulting white powder from when the mandrill is electrocuted is the Vraxoin. Secondly, when the ships do separate, the Doctor accidentally ends up on the survey vessel, the Hecate. When he's on the Hecate, the Doctor finds another CET machine, and this one's hooked up to a fancy communications laser. So the Doctor and Romana suggest to Stott that Trist himself could be the smuggler, and that the collision with the survey ship was no accident. This was meant to be the pickup point for the Vraxoin. The Eden projection would be transferred via the communications laser to the survey ship, which would then get away. they'd be able to retrieve the Vraxoan from the projection from the CET machine that they have on the survey ship. So Stott asks the doctor if he can prove it, because this is all hypothetical at this point. And the doctor says, I'll let them do it. So the transfer takes place. But meanwhile, in preparation for this, Romana has been modifying the CET machine, extending its range and power. And once the transfer is done, the doctor and Romana use the CET machine to capture the escaping survey ship, basically using the thing to transmute them onto Crystal. Since the projection can be entered and exited, the customs agents just have to step in and apprehend Trist and his confederate, the survey ship captain. So that's the story on that one. Now, why did I put these two stories together? So I found it really interesting that the same piece of technology, the scope or the CET machine, was used in two completely different stories in different ways. It occurred to me to wonder if the two stories were written by the same author, but no. Carnival was written by Robert Holmes and Nightmare was written by Bob Baker, and they were roughly 6 years apart, 73 and 79. In Carnival of Monsters, the TARDIS materialization appears to take place within the scope's compression field, leading to some initial mystery for the Doctor and Joe regarding where they are. When I started watching the story, I was like, oh, what's the connection between this, they're on this ship versus, these aliens and Borg and Sherman and everything. It's not clear what the connection is going to be at all. And so I thought that was kind of interesting for the story. The rest of Carnival is filled out with Kalich's coup plot, which is foiled by Borg's quick action with the Eradicator that had been sent to guard the machine. Now, in Nightmare of Eden, the machine is used to smuggle the Vraxoan because it escapes detection when it's in the transmuted form in the machine. So I thought that was pretty cool. It was very clever on Trist's part. And even better, I loved the ending. I loved the way the CET machine was used to capture Trist. There was a clever twist on the machine, using the machine itself to solve the crime, so to speak. So I thought both of these were fun stories, and I really enjoyed revisiting them for this episode. I recommend them both. I hope you'll give them a watch and see what you think. Let us know in the comments below. So that's it for this episode of Sci-Fi Eyes. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.